What's up guys, it's Kyle from Gravity here. In today's tutorial, we are going to build a complete to-do list SaaS application with everything from payments and authentication and a beautiful user interface. And the best bit is we're going to do it all within 30 minutes or less. Hey folks, welcome to another tutorial. It's Kyle from Gravity here, and today we are going to build a full-featured to-do list. For today's tutorial, we're going to be using my software as a service or SaaS boilerplate called Gravity, and this is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So the first thing I'm going to do here is install Gravity. I've already downloaded Gravity. I've got my boilerplate project set up here. The first thing I need to do now is run the setup command. If you haven't got a copy of Gravity, you can fetch a copy from usegravity.app. So you can head over there now and buy a copy of the boilerplate. Okay, so the installation process has finished and now the project is up and running. The next thing I need to do is configure a few setup parameters. So I'm going to jump over to the browser and then I'll show you through these different screens. So once you've installed Gravity, you need to spend just 2 minutes putting in some API keys and different bits of information. So the first thing you need to do is connect your database. So you just put in the host, the username, password, port, and the name of the database. And then you jump onto the next screen where you put in your Stripe keys, and this will automatically configure all of the payment functionality for you. Put in your mailgun information, some information about your production domain and support email address. You can also connect your Facebook app and Twitter app here if you want to use social logins. Then once you've done that, you simply restart the server. You can create a master account, which is used for managing all of your users, collecting feedback, impersonating users, different things like that. And then you are finished. That is your application setup. So the setup process is now complete and we've got our SaaS application up and running. So we've got everything from authentication, payments, we've got the user interface, all of that's now set up. So we can actually get our hands dirty with just writing our core code to build our to-do list. So I'm going to jump over to the database here. You can see our database is set up, ready to go. We just need to get some data in here now. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an account. So I'm going to go to sign up and then I'm going to create a user account. Once I've created the account, I'm asked to select a plan. So for this case, let's go and use a paid plan. So show you how Stripe integration works. There we go. We've got our application up and running. We've created a user account. We've also processed a payment. And then we're welcomed with this onboarding screen. So if I hop over to the database again and refresh this, you'll see that we've got our account created. We've got our Stripe customer set up. We've also got a user here. And then we have attached the user to an account. So Gravity takes care of all of this for you, all the user management, authentication. You don't need to worry about it. So the only thing you need to be concerned about next is building the to-do list. So let's jump back to our application. Here we have an example dashboard. So this is just some demo data that you can use to see how the application works and the different components that are included. But what we're going to do today is, first of all, we're going to create a new view in the application. We're going to create a new database table to store our to-do list items. And then after that, we will build a to-do list component to render the different to-do list items. To do this, it's actually quite simple. I'm going to jump over to my terminal. I'm going to open a new terminal here. And to create the new view and the new database table, we're going to use Gravity to scaffold this for us. So in my terminal, I'm going to type Gravity create to do. And then I'm going to add the UI flag because we want to create a new user interface view. And then I'm going to add the DB flag because I also want to create a new database table. Okay, so there we go. So I'm just going to show you what's actually happened here. So Gravity has created a new set of API endpoints. So you can see we've got our post patch get and delete for our new to-do list entry. So we've got a new API endpoint. It's also created the controller for us to handle these API requests. It's also created a model for us to interact with the database. And then finally, if we go into the client and we look at or into our views folder, you can see it's scaffolded a new React view, and then it's also added this to, it's also created a route for this. So when I go back to the application, if I just go to do, you'll see that we now have a blank view set up, and we've also got a new empty table in our database that we can start to populate with some data. Okay, so let's write some code. I'm going to jump over to my code editor and I'm going to open up this blank view that we have created, and we'll start to set up the user interface for our to-do list. So what I'm going to need for this is I'm going to need a few extra React elements. I'm going to need to use context, and we're going to import use effect, and then we're going to import some components from Gravity that we can use to construct our user interface. So I want to import the view context, which contains the modal function the modal object that we're going to use. I want a card, I want a button, and I want use API. I'm going to set the context. So view context in Gravity basically contains some global objects like our modal and our notification system, so we can just tap into these whenever we need. In this case, we're going to use a modal to add a new to-do list item. We will modify our state then, and we'll call this items, set items, we'll initialize it as an empty array. We will fetch the list of data from the API endpoint that our scaffolding created, and then so what I'm doing here is whenever list data changes, if the list has been returned from the API, we're going to put it into the state. The reason we're copying it into state is because we may want to modify the list by adding new to-do item or deleting a to-do item. And we want to be able to do this in the UI without having to reload all of the to-do list items from the server. So I'm just using use effect to do this. So just to make this clear, so what is happening here is we're using this use API hook to call this API endpoint in Gravity. It's going to fetch a list of to-do items, and then once the list data has changed, we're going to trigger this use effect hook, and then we're going to check if there is a list of items available. If there are, we're going to put them into the state. And the next thing I want to do is create a function or a modal that's going to enable us to actually add a to-do list item. So let's go ahead and do that next. So as I said, in the view context, we actually have a modal object that we can use to do this. So I'm going to call the context modal show. And then we can pass in different, we can pass in an object to this to determine what we want to see in our modal. So for this, I'm going to add a title. And we're also going to have a form to input the data that we're going to save for each to-do item. The way forms work in Gravity is you just use objects, and then Gravity will render the entire form. It'll handle all the validation and submission of the form. So here we're just going to pass in an object with 2 child objects for each input. So this is for each to-do list item is going to have a name, and that's going to be type text, and we're going to give it a label, and we'll say item name, and this is going to be required. And then we want to we'll give it a due date due. We'll say this is going to be a type date, and label, and this one is not going to be required because sometimes you might want to create a to-do list item that doesn't actually have a due date. Form. We can also set the button text in the modal. Whoops, what's going on there? We'll call this save item, and our form is going to post the data to API to do. Remember, whenever we scaffold this with Gravity, it set up all the endpoints for us, so these are all available for us to use. And then finally we'll set the method our modal also has a callback function. So once we've added the item, then we can append it to the UI. There we go. So what we want to do when we append this to the UI is, first thing we'll do is we'll say context notification show, just to show you how the notification banner works. And we also want to provide some feedback to the user that their item has been added. So again, we're just using context notification show, which creates a new notification. Then the first parameter is the text that we want to add. The type of notification, we can have success, error, warning, and then the final property is auto close, which just says close the notification after a few seconds. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add the new item into the state that we created. So we'll instantly get feedback, and the to-do list item will appear on the user interface as soon as we add it. So the way I'm going to do this, and the easiest way to do this, is I'm just going to clone the existing state using the spread operator, and then I'm going to push the new item into it, and then set items X. So our new item is going to be completed false, name. So this callback function will actually return the data that we've posted in the form. So we can then actually access that in our user interface. So I'm going to do data name dot value, and then date due, so data date due dot value. So once we post the form, we get a callback. We display a notification to say the item was added, and then we're going to push that into the state. Okay, I have an extra thing here that shouldn't be there, so just fix that. Okay, so the next thing I want to do then is just add a button to call this modal. So inside our return statement then is where the actual user interface will be rendered. So we've already imported our button component from Gravity. So I'll give this text, make the button small, and then we're going to set the button action to our add item function. Okay, so let's go over to the browser and actually see our code in action and hope that it works. So we've got our button, hit it, and there we go. We've got our modal, so we can actually add an item name, and we can select a date here. So let's actually see if this works. Do shopping, set up tomorrow, save item. Oh, and it didn't work. I'm gonna call them date. Okay, sorry, I've typoed in my code. This should be date due. So before we actually do this, we need to modify our to-do table. So our to-do table has just created the basic structure. So we have an ID, name, created, updated, and account ID. But I need to actually add the other fields in. So we're going to add a new column that's going to be 3, and we'll call this date due, and we'll give it as a timestamp. That's nullable. We'll save that, and then we will add another column, and we'll call this one date completed timestamp. That can also be nullable. And then finally we will add a field to just flag if the column is completed or not. So, and we'll say default is 0. Okay, so now we've actually put in the fields that our user interface is expecting. When I try this again, hopefully we will be third time lucky. So do shopping tomorrow, save item. Great. So we go to the database. There we go. There's our to-do list items saved. Now we haven't seen it in the user interface yet because although we've rendered it to the state, we haven't actually created our to-do list component yet and rendered any of our to-do list items. So let's go ahead and do that next. Go to create a new terminal window. And this time we're going to create a new React component, and I'm going to use the scaffold tool in Gravity again to do this. This time we're going to do create component to do item. Oh, we need to do Gravity create item. There we go. So jump into components. You will see that we should have a new to do item here. So let's just render very basic item here, and then go back into our view, and we'll import to do item, and then what we will do is next we'll render our items on our view UI. So let's wrap these in a card. So we'll call this to do list. We can pass in a loading prop. So our use API hook that's included in Gravity will actually set the loading state as it's getting the data from the API, and we can find it in this object. And we can pass this into the card, which will actually show a little loading spinner as it's fetching the data. And then what we want to do is go, so if we have items, then let's map them. And we'll return to do item, and then we'll pass item. And then if there's no items, okay, so this should in theory render. There we go. So because we just put in static text, what's actually happening here is it's fetching the one item for the database, and then it's rendering that list. So what we need to do next is actually build our to-do list component. So for this, I don't need any of these. What I do need is to import a button, form, and a badge from Gravity. We've imported our style. We don't need any state here, but first thing we'll do is if there's no props data passed in, we'll just return false. So we'll not render anything, and then we don't need use effect. But what we want here So what we want to do here is render 3 different things. We want to render a checkbox within a form that we can use to toggle whether the to-do item is completed or not. We want to render the name of the to-do list. We also want to render a badge which shows the date that the to-do list item is due. So the first thing I'm going to do is render a form with the checkbox. So I've already imported our form component from Gravity. So let's go ahead, and similar to the modal, we just pass in the object. We just pass in an object that represents what we want. So this time we want a checkbox. Options. And then if the to-do item is completed, then we're going to set the default checkbox, the default value, which will be completed. So this is basically just means that if the item is completed, the checkbox is checked by default. So we've got our form here, form data, and then our method this time is going to be patch. No, something's not right. There we go. This time our method is going to be patch. We're going to pass in the submit on change prop, which means that once we toggle the checkbox, it's actually going to submit the form and update the to-do list item. Let's get rid of that. And then our URL is going to be, so it's going to be API to do, and then we're going to pass in the actual ID of the to-do list item. We'll pass these in from the view in a second. So, we've already passed them in from the view, sorry. So we're basically mapping over the items that we've got from the API, and then we just pass those into this to-do item. So we want a form that shows the checkbox. Let's just see if that's working. Yes, there we go. We've got our checkbox here. We just need to render the other to-do list elements. So we go back here. This time we'll just add a div that has props data name. We go back here, we see we've got our do shopping, which we actually saved in the database. So you can see this view is using live data. If I refresh the screen, you can see the little loader come up for a second there while it was loading, and then we're rendering our live data. Next, let's add a badge. We'll make it blue, and then we'll show the props data date due. And you can see now we've got the date from the database. It looks a little bit ugly, so let's just trim it down to show these characters here. So for this, I'm gonna just manipulate the date. So new date. Okay, so whoops, split. Okay. So I'm just converting the date to an ISO string, splitting it at the T, and so I'll split it into an array, and then I'm just taking the first part of that array. So there we go. We've got our basic to-do list set up. We've added an item. If we add another item here, so item 2, we should immediately see this appear in the UI. There we go. Super easy. So what we're going to do next is actually enable us to toggle the to-do list item on and off. So we're just going to need to modify a little bit of code in the model in order to do this. So I'm going to jump back to my code editor. I'm going to look for the model that we created, and here you can see this is where Gravity scaffolded the model for interacting with this to-do list item in our database. We've got our create, get, and update. I just want to make a slight change to this update function. So because of the way the checkboxes work, I need to just check if whenever the checkbox is checked, it's going to pass in an array of items that are checked, which is great if we have lots of different checkboxes. But in this case, we just want to determine, is the checkbox checked or not? And if it is, then our to-do list item is completed. So very simply, I'm just going to do data. So this update function is going to get the ID of the item, the data that we want to update, and the account ID. So all these to-do list items will be locked to the parent account ID, so they can't be selected by other random accounts. So I'm just going to set the completed property is so data completed dot length. So this is just if our checkbox has a length, it means that it's checked. And then I can do data date completed equals if the checkbox is completed, create a new date, otherwise no. I'll just show you what's happening here whenever we post the data from the form, just so you can understand this a little bit better. So if I go back here and we check our shopping item, so it didn't work, but you can see here that I've logged out with data. So you can see we passed in completed, and because we've checked it, this array has a length. If we uncheck it, you'll see that it has no length. So we're just determining if the checkbox is checked or not. Let's see what this error is. So data completed. Oh yeah, sorry, it just shouldn't be there. So let's try this again. Okay, so if I refresh the page now, it should have saved that. There we go. Do the same with this. So it's now actually saving that our to-do list item is completed, or we can uncheck it. So we have a very basic to-do list system set up here. We can add new items, we can set the due date, we can mark our items done, or we can mark our items as complete or incomplete. One final thing that we might want to do then is to add some delete functionality. So if you actually maybe want to remove an item from your to-do list, that seems like a very reasonable thing to do. So let's go ahead and we'll add a delete button over here, and then we'll add some functionality to remove the to-do list item back into the to-do list component. So don't need this. Let's go to do item. What we'll do is we'll add a button. This time we'll use an icon. So this button comes from Gravity. We just pass in a few pops, and then Gravity will create the button for us. And then we'll create an anonymous function, and we'll so what's happening here is I've created a new button with a trash icon, and then I've set the action to props delete. So we're actually going to pass the delete functionality from our parent view, because that's where the list of items and the state is. So at the minute this is going to error, I think, because we haven't actually created that function yet. Yeah, so we get a React error. So let's go back to our parent view then, and we will create another function similar to add item. This time we'll call it delete item, and we'll use another modal again to give the user a confirmation message, to just double check that they want to delete the item. Similar to our add item function, I'm going to use context modal show again. Give it a title. We'll add some descriptive text. actually our delete. Remember, our delete item is going to have the actual, we're going to pass in props data from our to-do list items. We're passing it up to the parent component. So this, our delete item function is actually going to be able to access the data in the to-do list item. So we can actually say, are you sure you want to delete? And then we can show the user the item name. This time we want an empty form, and we want button text. This time we're going to use a delete method on our API, and our URL is going to be API to do data ID. And then we want to have a callback function. So our callback function then is similar to what we did in add item, where we display the notification and we push the item into state. This time we're just going to delete the item from state. So we'll show a notification, context, notification, show item was deleted, success, auto close, true. And then let's just copy the state again. And then we can do splice. So we're going to splice out this item. So we're going to find the index of the item. Based on the ID of the data object that we passed in. And we want to splice one item, and then we'll do set items X. So let's go back to the UI. See, our delete button has appeared here. In theory, when I click this button, item 2 should disappear. Nope, prop delete is not a function. Yes. So you see to-do list item, just need to pass in our delete item function. So we go here, delete item 2. Are you sure you want to delete item 2? Delete, boom, done. Okay guys, so there you have it. We have built a fully featured to-do list application in no time at all. You know, this kind of project would actually take months to do, especially when you factor in the payments and authentication and all the other bits and pieces you need to do. But thanks to Gravity, we've built this in like less than 60 minutes, maybe even less than 30 minutes. I won't know until I've edited the video. So if you find this video useful, please like and subscribe. If you find Gravity useful, just a reminder that you can get it from usegravity.app. So you can download the boilerplate and you can basically do everything that I've just done. You'll get the payments, you'll get the authentication, you'll get the user interface, you get a whole bunch of other stuff. You get the REST API setup, email notifications, user management, you get integration tests, user feedback component, user onboarding component. You get access to a Slack community of other developers. You've got a fully robust authentication system, error logging tools. You get a whole bunch of stuff included that will help you build your SaaS app at warp speed. Thank you very much. If you have any questions about the video, please just leave a comment down below, or go onto the website, contact me via the contact button. I'm always happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.